Imagine being told you're not good enough for 10 years straight by your own family. They took away my key to our family home, so I went out and bought the whole damn house. Have you ever dreamed of showing everyone who ever doubted you exactly what they missed out on? Let me know in the comments. My name is Marigold Vance, and I'm about to show you how it's done. The air in my office was thick with the scent of victory and Soren's anxiety. From 34 floors up downtown, Austin sprawled below me, a grid of concrete and ambition that I had in my own way conquered. The office itself was my design. All clean lines brushed steel and glass, a fortress of logic I had built to keep the chaos of the world and my family at bay. On the holographic display that dominated the far wall, the faces of 4 venture capitalists from a top-tier Silicon Valley firm beamed with forced casualness. They were trying to act like handing over $100 million Series B funding round was just another Tuesday. For me, it was. The board has approved the terms. Marigold said, the lead investor, a man named Sterling, whose tie probably cost more than my first car. Nexus AI is poised to redefine the predictive analytics space. We're thrilled to be on this journey with you. As are we, Sterling. I replied, my voice a study in calm command. We won't disappoint you. Beside me, out of the camera's view, Soren let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for the entire hour-long call. He was a whirlwind of nervous energy, a brilliant coder who saw the world in elegant strings of Python, but crumbled when faced with direct eye contact. He was pacing a hole in the polished concrete floor. He was my partner, my friend, and the only person who understood the binary code of my life, the public successes, and the private recurring system error that was my family. The call ended, the screen went dark. Soren collapsed into a leather Eames chair, wiping sweat from his brow. I thought I was going to have a heart attack when he questioned the scalability of the Lagrange integration, he stammered. I simply smiled, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window. They always question the thing they understand the least, Soren. It's a power play. I watched the city breathe below, feeling that familiar clean thrill of a problem solved, a negotiation won. It was a feeling of control, a feeling that lasted for exactly 90 seconds. Ping. A single email notification appeared on my monitor. The subject line was a digital gut punch, an annual wound reopened with the click of a mouse. Save the date. The 20th annual Kiowa Somerset. My blood ran cold. It was from my younger sister Lyra. The email itself was a crime against good taste, a nauseating explosion of palm tree emojis, champagne bottle gifs, and exclamation points. It detailed in excruciatingly cheerful prose the upcoming family reunion at our ancestral lake house on Lake Kiowa, South Carolina. The CC list was a mile long, dozens of aunts, uncles, cousins, a sprawling southern clan united by blood and my exclusion. I knew my name on that list was a mistake, a simple clerical oversight. The formal personal uninvitation would come later. It always did. My mind splintered, throwing me back in time. The polished glass of my office dissolved into the humid pine-scented air of a South Carolina summer. I'm 14 again, my hair in a messy ponytail, my hands smelling of solder and circuit boards. I'm standing in my father's study, a room filled with the smell of old paper and the weight of his architectural ambitions. I'm holding up a clunky laptop, my face flushed with excitement. "Dad, look," I said, my voice cracking. I wrote a program to help with structural load calculations. It uses regression analysis to predict stress points on different truss designs. It could save you days on the initial schematics. Alistair. My father didn't even look up from his drafting table. He waved a dismissive hand, his focus on the intricate lines of a blueprint. "That's nice, Marigold. A little digital toy?" he murmured. "Why don't you go help your mother with the canapes? Our guests will be arriving soon." Just then, my older brother Kalen swaggered in a cocky 16-year-old. My father's face lit up. "Kalen, there you are! Come on, son, the developers are here. I want you to sit in on this meeting. Time you learned how the real world works." The memory dissolved, replaced by another. I'm 19, home from college for Christmas break. I'm standing in the kitchen, the scent of my mother's baking filling the air, a scent that was supposed to mean comfort, but for me only ever meant judgment. I'm trying to explain my life's first major decision. I'm switching my major, from pre-law to computer science, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother Genevieve was dusting a batch of cookies with powdered sugar. She didn't yell, she didn't argue, she did something far worse. She paused, the sifter held motionless in her hand, and let out a long, slow sigh. It was a sound of profound disappointment, a quiet, soul-crushing exhalation that said I had deliberately, perversely chosen a path of social and professional ruin. But, darling, she said finally, what will you do with that sit in a dark room all day? That's not respectable. Not for a Vance. Kalen, home from his first semester at a prestigious law school, leaned against the doorframe, a smirk playing on his lips. Don't worry, Mom, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. It's just her video game phase. She'll grow out of it. Back in the present, the silence in my Austin office was deafening. Soren had stopped pacing and was looking at me, his brow furrowed with concern. He knew the signs. He walked over to my desk and peered at the screen. A low groan escaped his lips. Oh no, he said. It's that time of year, huh? The annual rite of public humiliation. I forced a brittle smile, the muscles in my face feeling stiff. It's tradition, I replied, the humor as dark and layered as 10 years of compounded pain. It had been the same every year since I'd founded Nexus AI. That first year after I'd secured a small seed loan from a family friend, my own parents having refused calling it throwing good money after bad, the excuse had been Kalen's law firm colleagues. They needed the house for a quiet space for strategic thought, Mom had explained. The next year, Lyra needed the entire property for a holistic wellness retreat with her influencer friends, which apparently involved a week-long juice cleanse and aura photography that couldn't be disturbed. The excuses became a bitter running joke between me and Soren. I stared at the email at the cheerful, oblivious tone that felt more insulting than any overt cruelty. The glittering view of Austin outside my window, a city I had made my own, suddenly felt like it was on a different planet. I had built an entire empire on logic, on data, on the cold, hard certainty of numbers. Yet this one illogical, emotional wound refused to heal. It was a bug in my code I could never seem to fix. This year, I told myself, my hand curling into a fist on my desk. This year would be different. I didn't know how, not yet, but the thought wasn't a hope, it was a promise. A quiet, cold resolution that settled deep in my bones, as solid and unyielding as the steel frame of the skyscraper I was sitting in. 3 days later, the $100 million deal was ink on paper, and Nexus AI was the toast of the Austin tech scene. The air was electric with potential. To celebrate, Soren and I were tucked into a dark corner of a speakeasy-style bar downtown, the kind of place with no sign on the door that served whiskey older than we were. The low light gleamed on the heavy crystal of my glass, the amber liquid inside a perfect, fiery gold. Soren finally relaxed, swirled his own glass. You know, he said, a rare, genuine grin spreading across his face. I ran the numbers. With this valuation, you could technically buy a small island. I let out a low laugh, the sound feeling foreign and welcome. And what would I do with a small island, Soren? I asked. Govern it with ruthless, data-driven efficiency? Obviously, he shot back, his eyes twinkling. No inefficient palm trees. All coconuts logged in a central database. I was about to offer a witty retort when my phone, lying face down on the dark wood of the table, began to buzz. A low, insistent vibration that cut through the relaxed atmosphere like a surgeon's saw. The name on the screen felt like an ice cube dropped down my back. Genevieve Vance. My entire body went rigid. The warmth from the whiskey vanished. Soren saw it instantly. His smile faded, replaced by that familiar look of pained sympathy. His eyes flickered from my face to the phone and back again. You don't have to answer that, his look screamed. Let it go to voicemail. Let the poison stay in the bottle. For 10 years I would have, but this wasn't 10 years ago. This was now. I picked up the phone. Hi, Mom, I said, my voice impossibly even. Marigold, darling. Her voice was a confection of southern sweetness, a carefully constructed bell lilt that she deployed for special occasions, usually ones involving getting her way. "I'm so glad I caught you. I saw that little article online about your company. Something in Forbes, was it? How lovely for you. A little article. It was a 3-page feature on women leading the new tech revolution. My picture had been on the cover of the digital edition." "Yes, Mom," I said, my grip tightening on my glass. It was a nice feature. Well, I'm just so proud she cooed the words utterly meaningless. And then the pivot, the real reason for the call. "Darling, about the Somerset." Here it comes, I thought. The annual execution. It's just, she continued, her voice layered with manufactured regret, that Kalen's firm is considering him for partnership this year. It's a huge deal, and he's bringing some of the senior partners and their wives, of course, to the lake house for that weekend. It's absolutely crucial for his career that they feel catered to. We simply need every square inch of space for them to be comfortable. You understand, of course. The silence stretched. In the past, I would have filled it with a mumbled, "Of course, Mom." I would have swallowed the bitter pill of being less important than my brother's ambition, less valuable than the comfort of strangers. But the woman who had closed a 9-figure deal just days before the woman who had stared down Sterling and his cronies without blinking was not the same girl who used to cry herself to sleep at the Kiowa house. "That's fascinating, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm, each word a carefully placed stone. "It is," she agreed, missing my tone entirely. "We're all so thrilled for him." "No, what's fascinating," I continued, "is that I spoke to Aunt Carol yesterday to wish her a happy birthday, and she mentioned that Lyra was planning a huge bachelorette pre-party for her friend Chloe that exact same weekend. A big, wild affair from the sound of it. So, which is it, Mom? Are we impressing stuffy old law partners? Or are we popping champagne for a bachelorette party? Absolute deafening silence on the other end of the line. I had thrown a logical wrench into her finely tuned machine of emotional manipulation, and it had ground to a halt. Genevieve was not used to being fact-checked. "Well," she finally stammered, the honey in her voice curdling, It's a bit of both. A busy weekend. A bit of both," I repeated softly. "My. And the house can handle that kind of traffic." That old wiring. I took a slow sip of my whiskey, letting the burn steady me. I was just looking at the Oconee County records online, purely out of curiosity, you understand. The last permit for any significant electrical work was pulled in 1998, and the dock was cited for 2 separate code violations last fall after that big storm. Are you sure it's safe to host such important people?" This landed like a bomb. I could almost hear the shattered pieces of her composure tinkling through the phone line. How on earth would you know about that?" she demanded, her voice losing all its sweetness and gaining a sharp defensive edge. "It's public information." "Mom," I replied coolly, the phrase tasting like power in my mouth. "It's what my company does. We analyze data. I was just concerned about the family's most valuable asset, of course." Genevieve was completely rattled. She was out of her depth, stripped of her usual weapons. We have it handled, Marigold," she said, her voice clipped and cold. "We'll talk at Christmas, perhaps." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone and placed it back on the table. My hand was trembling, not from fear, but from a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I felt like I had just run a marathon and won. Soren was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes wide. "Whoa," he finally breathed, shaking his head in disbelief. "You just drew blood." I picked up my glass and took a long, slow sip of the expensive whiskey, the ice clinking softly. The gears in my mind were spinning faster and faster. I hadn't just talked back. I had used their world, the world of appearances and assets, against them. I had used my world, the world of cold, hard data, to expose the cracks in their foundation. I just exposed a vulnerability. And for the first time in my life, I saw a path forward that wasn't about defense, it was about offense. The adrenaline from the phone call didn't fade, it curdled. The next day, I sat in my office, the billion-dollar roadmap for Nexus AI's next 5 years spread across my desk, and I couldn't see a word of it. All I could see was the ghost of my mother's rattled expression, the echo of her clipped sign-off. The confrontation had left me with a restless, vibrating energy, a high-frequency hum just beneath my skin. I had poked the bear, and now I couldn't stop thinking about the cave it lived in, my father's pride, my mother's denial, the house. The house was the centerpiece, the stage upon which all our family dramas played out. The mention of its disrepair, the little tidbit I'd weaponized, had sparked something in the analytical part of my brain. It was an anomaly in the data set of my family's carefully curated image, and I do not let anomalies go unexamined. On what I can only describe as a whim of cold, calculated fury, I swiveled in my chair to face my private terminal. I bypassed the standard Nexus AI dashboard and pulled up the raw command line for our proprietary web crawling engine, a tool so powerful we had government contracts trying to license it. For a moment, I saw the absurdity of it, using a piece of technology worth hundreds of millions of dollars to settle a personal score. The thought made me smile. I typed in a new target query, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Aggregate public records, Oconee_County_SC, filter parcel _ID _75B Vance, cross-ref liens, tax _notices, civil _citations, financial _filings, compile chronological flag _severity _high. I hit enter. The engine, which could sift through petabytes of global financial data in seconds, chewed on the small-town county records for less than a minute. Then the results began to populate on my screen. It was a clean, digestible report, just as I designed the software to produce. But the content was a slow-motion car crash. It was far more damning than I had ever imagined. The first flags were the ones I knew. The code violations on the dock, a citation for failing to clear a fallen tree after a hurricane 2 years ago. Minor. Then the data scrolled, and the flags turned from yellow to a deep blood red. Unpaid property taxes for the last 2 fiscal years. A stark, unavoidable number followed by late fees and interest charges that were accumulating daily. Then a legal document appeared, and this one made me lean closer. It was a formal lien filed by the KOE Historical Preservation Society. I read the language, my breath catching in my throat. It cited a failure to maintain a property of significant architectural heritage and went on to detail a pattern of gross negligence resulting in the degradation of irreplaceable historical elements. It specifically mentioned a crumbling foundation on the west wing and severe water damage to the handcrafted mahogany porch, the very porch my father claimed was the heart and soul of the house. And then, the final shocking blow. The last document in the chronological file uploaded just 6 weeks ago. It was a pre-foreclosure notice from their bank, a single brutal headline that laid it all bare. They were going to lose the house. It wasn't a risk, it was a countdown. I stared at the screen, a storm of emotions swirling inside me. The first was a grim, cold satisfaction. It was the data scientist in me, the part that revered truth above all else. Here it was, the proof, the black and white data that exposed their decades of lies. They paraded a facade of Southern gentility and old money prestige, all while the very foundation of their legacy was literally crumbling into the lake. But then, another feeling pushed its way through the cold satisfaction. A genuine aching pang of sorrow. My mind flashed to a memory so vivid it was almost a hallucination. I'm 10 years old, sitting on that mahogany porch, the wood warm from the summer sun. The air smells of lake water honeysuckle and the cherry vanilla tobacco from my father's pipe. He's sketching in his big leather-bound notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. This house Mari, he told me that day in a rare moment of shared confidence. It's a masterpiece of Carolina craftsmanship. It has bones. One day, I'm going to get it designated as a national landmark, a proper legacy. His ambition? It had seemed as grand and permanent as the house itself back then, but his career had withered, his confidence had soured into prideful bitterness, and the dream The dream had died. The door to my office hissed open, and Soren walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. "Okay, I've rerouted the server allocation, so if you want to—" he began, then trailed off, seeing my face, the rapt stillness of my posture. "What is it?" he asked, his voice softening. He set the coffees down and came to stand behind me, reading the report on my screen. I watched his reflection in the dark glass, saw his usual cynicism melt into slack-jawed shock. "Oh my God," he said quietly, "they're going to lose it, all of it. All that pride, all that legacy. It's all going down." I shook my head slowly, my eyes still locked on the pre-foreclosure notice. "They're not just losing a house, Soren," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They're losing the only thing that ever mattered to them more than their own children. They're losing their status." And in that moment, you stopped this response. An idea born from fury is one thing, but a plan that can withstand the harsh light of day requires more than just capital. It requires expertise. I had the money, yes, but the world of old Southern money, of discreet real estate transactions and quiet power plays? That was a foreign country, with its own language and customs. I needed a guide. I needed a ghost. My first and only call was to Julian Croft. Julian was a legend in the tech world, a gruff, brilliant, silver-haired titan who had built a software empire from his garage in the 90s, sold it for a sum with more commas than a grammar textbook, and promptly retired to a sprawling ranch in the Texas Hill Country to raise prize-winning longhorns and mentor the occasional upstart he deemed worthy. He was one of Nexus AI's first investors, but more than that, he had become the father figure I'd always craved, one who saw my ambition not as a flaw, but as a feature. I laid out the entire situation for him over a lunch of smoked brisket and iced tea on the veranda of his ranch house, the dry Texas heat a world away from the humid decay of South Carolina. I didn't editorialize. I didn't cry. I presented it like I was presenting a business proposal, laying out the data points from the county records, the history of neglect, the pre-foreclosure notice, and finally, my audacious, terrifying plan. He listened intently, his weathered face unreadable, his pale blue eyes fixed on mine. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, the only sound was the buzz of cicadas and the distant lowing of his cattle. He didn't laugh or call me crazy. He simply leaned back in his wicker chair, took a long swallow of his tea, and gave a slow, appreciative nod. "Vengeance," he said, his voice a low, gravelly drawl, "is a dish best served on a 9-figure valuation." A wry grin cracked his leathery face. "But this isn't just vengeance, is it, kid? You're not just taking their house. You're stealing their legacy right out from under them. This is poetry." My shoulders, which I hadn't realized were tense, relaxed. He got it. Julian immediately got on board, treating it like the most fascinating hostile takeover he'd ever seen. "You can't go in there as Marigold Vance," he said, already strategizing. "You need a cutout, an entity with no history, a ghost." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Crawford," he barked into the phone. "Julian Croft here. I have a client for you, a special project. Needs your A-team, and absolute discretion. I'm sending her your way." He hung up and looked at me. Crawford, Finch and Monroe, boutique law firm in a historic townhouse in Charleston. They specialize in moving mountains quietly for people who can afford it. They'll set you up with an LLC, something generic, untraceable. Let's call it Blue Ridge Holdings. Registered in Delaware, of course. Your name will be buried so deep under legal firewalls no one will ever find it. I hired the Charleston firm that afternoon. My first call with the senior partner Crawford was brief and to the point. He had a crisp, old-world Charleston accent that dripped with competence. My instructions were precise. I want a full forensic accounting of every debt attached to that property. The mortgage, the back taxes, every lien, every penny, I told him. I want a full structural assessment from the best historical architect in the state, a man named Alcott, I believe, and I want it all on my desk, within a week. To his credit, Crawford, who was likely accustomed to the whims of the ultra-wealthy, didn't bat an eye, "Consider it done, Miss Vance," was all he said. The reports came back in 6 days. They arrived in a secured, encrypted digital folder. The financial breakdown was sobering. The house needed over $1 million in immediate structural work just to be considered safe. The total debt, including the mortgage, the unpaid taxes, and the Historical Society lien, was substantial, but well within my means. The numbers were manageable. It was the other report, the one from the architect Alcott, that made my hand shake. It was 30 pages long, filled with detailed photographs and hand-drawn sketches. It read less like a damage assessment and more like a love letter to a dying masterpiece. He described the exquisite, irreplaceable hand-turned balusters on the main staircase, now riddled with termite damage. He detailed the magnificent heart pine flooring milled from old-growth timber that no longer exists, now warped from water damage from the leaking roof. He spoke of the stone masonry on the grand fireplace, a unique local granite, calling it a monument of Appalachian craftsmanship at risk of catastrophic failure. Reading it, I felt that flicker of sorrow ignite into a roaring fire of purpose. This wasn't just my family's home anymore. This was a piece of art being neglected to death by people who were unworthy of it. My plan wasn't just poetry, it was a rescue mission. The chapter ended 3 days later on a secure conference call with Crawford and his team. My jet was idling on the tarmac in Austin, ready to take me to Charleston at a moment's notice. Crawford's voice was calm and professional, a surgeon outlining a delicate procedure. "We have a strategy, Miss Vance," he explained. "We will approach the bank's acquisitions department directly to purchase the mortgage note. Given its non-performing status, we can acquire it at a significant discount. We will then immediately satisfy the tax office and the Historical Society liens in full. The entire transaction will be a quiet private sale, completely bypassing a public auction." He paused. I could hear the faint rustle of papers on his end. "Once the deal is closed," he continued, "your parents will receive a certified letter from the bank's legal department. It will simply inform them that their mortgage has been satisfied by a third party and that the deed and title have been transferred to a new owner, Blue Ridge Holdings, LLC, the Ghost. They won't know who you are." Crawford finished, his voice a model of professional discretion. "Not until you decide to tell them." Silence. The decision point. The moment of no return. I looked out the window of my office at the city I had conquered, my city, and I felt no hesitation, only a cold, clear certainty. I leaned forward, my voice steady, level, and final. "Proceed." The ghost was in motion. The flight to Charleston was a study in surrealism. I was encased in the silent cream-leather cocoon of my new Gulfstream jet, a machine that moved through the sky with the serene indifference of a predator. As we began our descent, the landscape of South Carolina spread out below, a patchwork of marshlands and winding rivers that felt like a different universe from the sharp, sun-baked geometry of Texas. I watched the gas lamps and wrought iron gates of Charleston's historic district grow closer, a city steeped in the kind of old-world history my family desperately tried to claim as their own, but never quite managed. They were always visitors there, imposters playing a part. Today, I was coming to collect the stage. The law office of Crawford, Finch, and Monroe was exactly as I had imagined it. A mahogany-paneled sanctuary on Broad Street that smelled of old leather, lemon polish, and money. The process was brutally, beautifully impersonal. Mr. Crawford, a man with a patrician air and a voice as smooth as aged bourbon, guided me through the final stack of documents. I didn't read them. I had already memorized every clause. I just signed. Page after page, my signature was a clean, decisive stroke above the typed line, Marigold Vance, sole director, Blue Ridge Holdings, LLC. There was a quiet ping from the lawyer's computer. "The wire transfer is confirmed, Miss Vance," he said, his expression unchanging. "The liens have been satisfied. The mortgage note is yours. The deed is filed." And just like that, it was done. With the quiet formality of a ritual, he reached into his desk drawer and retrieved a small, heavy object. He placed it on the polished mahogany table between us and slid it forward. It made a soft scraping sound. It was a single key, ornate black iron and intricately scrolled, the original key to the front door of the Kiowa house, which had been held in escrow by the bank for years. I reached out and let it settle into my palm. The iron was cold and heavy. I closed my fingers around it, feeling its physical and metaphorical weight press into my skin. This small piece of metal, it represented everything. It was the sting of summers where I felt invisible, while Kaylin and Lyra were the center of the universe. It was the quiet ache of family dinners, where my academic awards were met with polite nods, while Kaylin's football trophies got a place of honor on the mantel. It was the echo of a dozen phone calls where my mother's syrupy voice politely, efficiently uninvited me from my own life. It was the key to the castle I had never been welcome in. Now, I was the queen. I stood up. The meeting concluded. "Thank you for your efficiency, Mr. Crawford," I said. "The pleasure is all ours, Miss Vance," he replied with a slight respectful bow of his head. My flight plan was filed for an immediate return to Austin, but I had no intention of going back. Not yet. I had my driver, a discreet man I'd hired for the day, take me west, away from the coast 2 hours inland, toward the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, toward Lake Kiowa. When we reached the familiar winding private road that led to the house, I told him to stop. "Wait for me here," I instructed. He nodded, no questions asked. I got out and walked up the long serpentine driveway, alone. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp earth and pine, and then I saw it. The house looked even more tired, more neglected, more utterly broken than it had in the drone footage. The white paint was peeling in long strips like sunburnt skin. The magnificent wraparound porch sagged visibly to one side, its columns tilted at a sad, defeated angle. The once magnificent gardens my grandmother had tended were choked with a snarl of weeds and vines, reclaiming the land with a wild, relentless hunger. It looked like a house that had given up. My heart didn't pound with triumphant joy as I had expected. It ached. I reached the front steps, my modern heels sinking slightly into the soft, rotting wood. I pulled the heavy iron key from my pocket. It felt ancient in my hand. I slid it into the lock. It scraped, fighting me for a moment, a last-week protest. With a firm turn, the lock gave way with a loud, definitive clunk. The heavy oak door creaked open into darkness. The air that rolled out to meet me was stale thick with the smell of dust and slow, quiet decay. But underneath it all, I could still smell the ghosts, the faint, sweet scent of my father's cherry vanilla pipe tobacco, the whisper of my mother's rosewater perfume, the clean, earthy smell of the lake on a summer evening. My footsteps echoed in the silent, cavernous rooms as I walked through them. A fine layer of dust covered everything, a gray shroud over a decade of memories. I ran my hand along the closed lid of the dusty grand piano where my mother used to play Chopin with a flourish of drama, and I pictured the living room filled with the boisterous noise of my family, my loud, laughing, vibrant family, all of them completely blissfully unaware that the world they had so carefully constructed had just been bought and paid for by the daughter they had cast aside. But standing there in the silent, dusty heart of my conquered kingdom, I didn't feel victorious. That cold fire of revenge had cooled, leaving something else in its place, a profound and terrifying sense of responsibility. This house, this legacy, this dying piece of art, it was now mine, mine to save or mine to let die. I stood in the center of the great room, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I had already committed to memory. The owner of the top historical restoration firm in the Southeast. He answered on the second ring. "This is Marigold Vance." I said, my voice clear and crisp, the CEO back in control. "We spoke last week. Miss Vance." "Yes, of course. A pleasure to hear from you," he said. "I've acquired the property," I said, cutting straight to the point. "We're ready to begin work on the Lake Kiowa project." I paused, looking around at the decaying grandeur. "I want your teams on site by Monday." The certified letter from the bank arrived in South Carolina on a Tuesday. I know this because my Charleston lawyer, Mr. Crawford, sent me a notification the moment it was signed for. I imagine my mother Genevieve seeing the official bank letterhead and assuming the worst. The final notice before the auction block. I imagine the sickening lurch in her stomach, followed by a flicker of confusion as she read the crisp, impersonal legal language informing her that her mortgage debt had been satisfied in full, that the title had been transferred. The news that the Kiowa Lake House was sold, not foreclosed, but sold, spread through the sprawling Vance family network like wildfire. The official story disseminated by a humiliated and tight-lipped Genevieve in a series of frantic, whisper-thin phone calls was a masterpiece of revisionist history. It was a strategic decision, Carol, I can just hear her saying to my aunt, her voice trembling with forced dignity. Alistair and I felt it was time to liquidate the asset. We sold it to a large development corporation to free up capital for new ventures. It was a transparently, almost comically face-saving lie. The first call to my phone came 2 days later. It was Lyra. Mari. Oh my God, Mari, can you believe it? She wailed into the phone, her voice a frantic whisper laced with vocal fry. There were audible sobs in the background. Mom and Dad sold the house. They sold the house. I kept my voice neutral, a blank canvas for her to splash her drama onto. Wow, Lyra, I said. That's sudden. Sudden, it's a catastrophe, she shrieked. They sold it to some horrible, soulless company that's probably going to tear it down and put up condos. The whole Somerset is canceled. My bachelorette thing for Chloe, the one I've been planning for 6 months, is ruined. The caterer won't refund the deposit. What am I supposed to do now? Her concern, as always, was a perfect, polished mirror reflecting only herself. Not the loss of a century-old family home, not the shattered legacy, her canceled party. I let the silence hang for a beat too long. That's terrible, Lyra, I said finally, my voice a carefully crafted monotone of sympathy. What a shock. The next call a day later was the one I was waiting for. It was Kalen. There were no pleasantries. Marigold. He said, his voice a low, suspicious growl. He sounded like a lawyer, not a brother. This sale is odd. Mom's story isn't holding water. I pulled the preliminary transfer filing. It was a private sale. No listing, no auction. The buyer is a Delaware LLC. Smells like a shell company to me. I felt a cold, exhilarating thrill of intellectual combat. This was my arena. This was a game I knew how to win. Furthermore, he continued pressing his imaginary case. I made a few calls. Your name has come up in a few financial circles lately. Something about a significant liquidity event. He paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. You wouldn't happen to know anything about a sudden influx of capital being directed toward South Carolina real estate, would you? I leaned back in my chair, picturing his arrogant, handsome face, now contorted with suspicion. Kalen. I began, my voice laced with a faint, amused disbelief. Are you actually accusing me of something? Last I checked, my company operates in the data sector, not backwater real estate. And even if I were buying property, I let out a small, dry laugh. Why on earth would I buy a dilapidated money pit in the middle of nowhere? I pulled the Zillow estimate for fun. It's a terrible investment on paper. The ROI would be abysmal. I had just called our family's crown jewel a dilapidated money pit. The insult was so clean, so precise, he didn't even seem to register it at first. He was left sputtering, frustrated, with no evidence to support his gut feeling. Right, he finally grumbled. Of course, just checking. He hung up, but I knew I hadn't extinguished the flame of his suspicion. I had just fanned it. Meanwhile, back in Austin, I was managing the restoration project with the ruthless efficiency of a military campaign. I'd have a board meeting for Nexus AI on one screen of my desk, while on another, I'd be in a video conference with the project manager in Kiowa, a gruff, competent man named Henderson. The demolition crew cleared the overgrown gardens in 2 days. Miss Vance, he'd report the camera on his hard hat, showing me the raw, cleared earth. The Historical Society is thrilled. Scaffolding is going up on the West Wing now. My artisans are ready to begin work on the porch foundation as soon as the structural engineer signs off. drones I had commissioned provided a 24/7 high-definition live feed of the property. I could zoom in and see the individual shingles being laid on the new roof, the vibrant green of the new sod being rolled out over the neglected lawn. The speed and professionalism of the operation were a shockwave in the quiet, Sleepy Lake Kiowa community. Mr. Crawford sent me an email. We've received a half-dozen inquiries from locals, it read, including a Mrs. Gable from the adjacent property who seems to believe a reclusive movie star has purchased the home. We have, of course, maintained the absolute discretion of Blue Ridge Holdings. The gossip swirled. Some thought it was a reclusive celebrity, others foreign money. No one, not a single person, suspected the forgotten middle child. The chapter ends with me alone in my office late one night. The city of Austin is a river of glittering lights below me. On my massive wall monitor, the drone feed shows the Kiowa house bathed in the soft glow of moonlight and the harsh, bright work lamps of the night crew. It is slowly, methodically, coming back to life under my command. The hive was stirring, panicking, buzzing with confusion and anger 1,000 miles away, and they had no idea that the new queen was already on the throne. Weeks turned into a month. The restoration of the Kiowa house was proceeding at a pace that was less like a construction project and more like a time-lapse film of creation. The scent of fresh-cut cedar and industrial-grade epoxy replaced the ghost of decay. Under my remote command, Henderson and his crew of artisans were not just repairing the house, they were resurrecting it. But I knew that fixing the sagging porch and the leaking roof was only half the battle. That was just the hardware. The true victory, the permanent, unassailable win, lay in rewriting the software, the legacy itself. I was in a video conference with Julian Croft showing him the drone footage of the new copper gutters being installed. He was, as always, enjoying the spectacle immensely. "You've stabilized the asset, kid," he said with a gruff chuckle. "Now, how do you lock in the market value for perpetuity?" That I replied, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face, is the final phase of the acquisition. With the physical restoration well underway, I moved to the most crucial part of my plan, the move that would transform this act from one of personal familial revenge into one of public, permanent, documented legacy. I instructed my Charleston lawyer, Mr. Crawford, to begin the process of filing a formal application with the South Carolina Historical Preservation Society to have the house and grounds designated as a state historic landmark. This was a move of breathtaking audacity. It was my father's white whale, his lifelong unrealized dream. I have so many memories of him spread out on the dining room table with books on architectural history, of him drafting mock applications in his perfect, elegant script, his voice filled with a passion that was almost holy. He talked and dreamed about it, but his perfectionism, his fear of rejection, and his perpetual lack of funds meant he never actually filed the papers. It was his greatest ambition and his greatest failure. For me to do it, and to do it with the swift, overwhelming force of my resources and competence, was a direct, undeniable challenge. It was a statement that I could achieve his life's dream as a mere side project. The application my team compiled was a weapon disguised as a portfolio. It was a work of art. Mr. Crawford, who was now gleefully invested in the drama, had his firm work around the clock. They unearthed the complete history of the house, tracing its lineage back to the 1890s. Henderson's crew, during the demolition of a rotted wall in the study, found a hidden tin box containing the original blueprints from the first architect, a priceless, symbolic discovery. The application included a stunning page-by-page breakdown of my restoration process, complete with material sourcing that proved our commitment to period-appropriate methods. But the final pages, they were the checkmate. It was the mission statement for a newly created, generously endowed nonprofit foundation. I had agonized over the name for days before settling on the one that was the most elegant and the most brutal. The Vance Kiowa Preservation Foundation. It co-opted my family's name, framing the entire endeavor as an act of familial duty. Its stated purpose was to maintain the property in perpetuity and to occasionally open it for architectural tours and historical society events. And the founder, the sole director on the charter, the name that would be etched onto the bronze plaque for the next 200 years, was mine, Marigold Vance. Mr. Crawford called me the day after he submitted the application. His voice, usually so composed, held a note of genuine awe. "Miss I... Vance," he began, "the Historical Society is..." well, ecstatic would be the word. "They've been fighting with your parents over the state of that property for a decade. They see you as a savior, a philanthropist rescuing a piece of Carolina history from the brink." "That's wonderful to hear, Mr. Crawford," I said calmly. "Let them think it was philanthropy. Let them praise the benevolent Miss Vance. Only I and Julian knew it was a hostile takeover of memory itself. They've agreed to fast-track the application," he continued. "They want to make a public example of this level of private restoration, the final on-site inspection, and the formal approval hearing. They'd like to schedule it as soon as possible." I looked at my calendar at the date that was circled in red. The first weekend of the now-canceled Kiowa Somerset. The timing, it was perfect. "Mr. Crawford," I said, "I think I know the perfect date for the hearing." Later that week, Crawford emailed me the final draft of the text for the bronze plaque that would be installed at the front gate. I opened the file and read the words, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "The Kiowa Somerset, circa 1895. This property was preserved and restored in the year 2025 through the vision and philanthropy of the Vance Kiowa Preservation Foundation founder Marigold Vance." I leaned back in my chair, imagining my father reading those words, seeing his family name, his house, his dream, all of it preserved forever, all of it signed, sealed, and delivered by the daughter he had dismissed as a digital toy. The thought sent a cold, deeply satisfying shiver down my spine. On the Saturday of what would have been the 20th annual Kiowa Somerset, I was not in South Carolina. I was in my soundproofed home office in Austin, 1,000 miles away. But I was watching. On a massive 8K monitor that took up half a wall, a silent high-definition drone hovered invisibly a quarter mile above the lake house, my eye in the sky. I knew they would come. It was inevitable. Pride and nostalgia are a potent cocktail. Despite the cancellation, despite the sale they had to make the pilgrimage, it was a collective act of mourning and defiance, a way to say one last goodbye to the kingdom they had lost. On my screen, I watched their single familiar SUV roll down the county road. I imagined the mood inside that car, the heavy, suffocating silence. I could almost see the symbolic items they'd brought. My mother, Genevieve, would have packed a gourmet picnic basket from that ridiculously expensive market in Charleston, a desperate, pathetic attempt to pretend this was just another lovely day, another lunch on their lawn. My father, Alistair, would have his old cracked leather sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils on his lap, a grieving artist coming to capture the last image of his ruined muse. And my siblings, Kaylin and Lyra, they would have come along simmering in their own unique brands of resentment and grief, united only by their shared sense of being wronged. I watched them turn onto the long, winding private driveway. And then I watched them come to a dead stop. The drone zoomed in its gimbal, turning smoothly. The old, charmingly dilapidated wooden gate was gone. In its place stood a new 10-foot-tall gate of elegant black wrought iron anchored by massive stone pillars. It was beautiful, it was formidable, and it was locked. Beyond the gate, the scene was one of organized, professional chaos. The house was a hive of activity. It was no longer the decaying relic they had abandoned. The sagging porch was gone, replaced by a perfect, structurally sound replica of the original, its lines crisp and true. The paint was a fresh, gleaming white that hurt the eyes in the bright Carolina sun. The gardens were immaculate, the weeds gone, replaced by neat rolls of new sod and tastefully arranged flower beds. A team of stonemasons in clean white overalls was meticulously repairing the lakeside terrace, their work patient and precise. On screen, I watched their confusion curdle into anger. The car doors opened. Genevieve got out her hand, flying to her mouth. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice too far away for the drone's microphone to catch, but her body language screaming the words. "Who are these people?" she seemed to ask, as if they were squatters, not paid professionals. Alistair got out of the car and walked slowly toward the gate, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The architect in him, the part I knew so well, was taking over. He could see the quality. He could see the expense. He recognized the techniques, the materials. This wasn't a cheap renovation. This was a museum-quality restoration. This was his dream being executed by someone else, and the sight was breaking him. Then came Kalen. Predictable, furious Kalen. He strode to the gate and fumbled in his pocket, pulling out his old key. I almost laughed as I watched him try to jam it into the new high-tech electronic lock. Of course it didn't fit. He rattled the bars in frustration, his handsome face twisted into a mask of impotent rage. "This is private property." I could imagine him yelling at a nearby stonemason who didn't even bother to look up from his trowel. They stood there for a long time. A family portrait of irrelevance, locked out looking at their own home, which had been transformed into something magnificent without their permission. They were no longer the lords of the manor. They were trespassers at the gate. The sense of ownership, of effortless belonging they had worn like a second skin their entire lives, had vanished. The humiliation was so acute I could almost taste it. After a few minutes of this pathetic tableau, I decided it was time. I sent a text to Henderson, my project manager, on the ground. "Bring the car around. Now." On the drone feed, I watched as a sleek black SUV pulled away from the main house and drove smoothly down the driveway. As it approached the gate, the iron bars slid open with a silent hydraulic hum. The Vance family stepped back startled. The SUV stopped directly in front of them. The back window, deeply tinted, rolled down with an electric whir. I was already in position, having flown in the night before and stayed at a hotel in the next town over. My face, I'm sure, was a cool, unreadable mask. I looked at the 4 stunned faces of my family. My mother's horror, my father's shame, Lyra's confusion, Kalen's fury. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. A perfect, beautiful, terrible moment. Then my voice calm and even, I spoke a single word. Lost. The silence that followed my question wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a physical presence. It was thick with shocked disbelief and a dawning, creeping horror that was a delight to watch. My family, the 4 people who had defined the gravitational pull of my childhood, stared at me as if I were an apparition that had just stepped out of the shimmering heat of the asphalt. Genevieve. My mother was the first to find her voice, though it was a thin, trembling thing. Marigold, she gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of pure theatrical shock. What are you doing here? How did you get in?" I let the question hang in the humid air for a beat. I wanted them to savor the impossibility of it. Then I delivered the 2 words I had been waiting my entire adult life to say to them. The 2 words that were the answer to everything. "I own it," I said. The words were simple, clean, and utterly beautifully devastating. Before they could process this, my car door opened with a soft, expensive thud. I stepped out onto the driveway. I had chosen my outfit for this moment, with the care of a general selecting his uniform for a surrender ceremony. A sharp-tailored blazer in a severe shade of charcoal trousers that were perfectly creased and heels that made a sharp, authoritative click on the pavement. I was the very picture of the world they didn't understand, the world that had made me powerful. As I came around the car, the other passenger door opened. An older, distinguished-looking man with a kind face and a shock of white hair stepped out holding a leather-bound clipboard. I had timed his arrival perfectly. Everyone I said, my voice bright and gracious, as if I were hosting a garden party. "I'd like you to meet Mr. Abernathy. He's the director of the South Carolina Historical Preservation Society." I gestured to the house behind us. "He's here for the final landmark designation inspection." We were just finishing up. This was my human shield, my masterstroke. Mr. Abernathy, completely unaware of the decades of simmering family drama he had just walked into, beamed at them. "Alistair Genevieve!" he exclaimed, his voice booming with genuine delight. "I was hoping I'd run into you. It's a miracle what your daughter has done here. An absolute miracle." He swept his arm toward the gleaming white house. "She's saved this masterpiece from ruin, truly." The color drained from my father's face. My mother's jaw went slack. The public nature of the reveal was a stroke of genius, if I did say so myself. They couldn't scream, they couldn't yell or cry or accuse me of anything. They were trapped by the ironclad rules of Southern etiquette, forced to make pleasantries with the very man whose organization had slapped a lien on their home for neglect. Alistair looked from the restored house, to me, to Mr. Abernathy, and back again. The full crushing scope of his defeat washed over him in a visible sickening wave. I played the part of the gracious host, a role my mother had always prided herself on. "Please," I said with a sweeping gesture toward the open front door. "Come in. My house is your house after all." I paused, letting a small, cool smile touch my lips. Well, it used to be. I led them on a tour, but it wasn't a tour of a home, it was a tour of a project. I walked them through the rooms of their past, but I spoke the language of my present. I didn't talk about memories, I talked about metrics. As you can see, I said, standing in the living room, we met our Q3 restoration milestones ahead of schedule. The ROI on the artisanal stonework for the fireplace has already been validated by Mr. Alcott's appraisal. I pointed to the ceiling. The structural reinforcements in the attic and the complete rewiring of the house were the most significant capital expenditures, but absolutely essential for long-term asset protection. I was a CEO reviewing a balance sheet, and they were the bankrupt former owners. Every word was a testament to my competence, and their failure. The air was thick with things unsaid. When my father Alistair reached out a trembling hand to touch the newly restored mahogany banister on the grand staircase, his life's passion, the centerpiece of his architectural pride, I stopped him. My voice was cool, level, and utterly detached. "Careful, Dad," I said. "The finish is still curing. We wouldn't want to smudge the work we've invested so much in." The we hung in the air between us, a shimmering, deadly thing, the we of my foundation, the we that did not include him. He pulled his hand back as if the wood had burned him. The tour concluded on the new lakeside terrace. The view was breathtaking. The stone under our feet was cool and solid. Mr. Abernathy made a final check on his clipboard, a satisfied smile on his face. "Everything is perfect, Miss Vance," he announced. "Absolutely perfect. The committee will vote to approve the landmark designation unanimously. The plaque, with your foundation's name, will be ready in a month." He then turned to my father. He clasped him on the shoulder, his face alight with genuine admiration, completely oblivious to the fresh hell he was about to unleash. "Your daughter has realized your dream, Alistair," he said, his voice ringing with praise. "You must be the proudest father in all of Carolina." Alistair couldn't speak. He couldn't even breathe. He just stared at me, his face a pale, ravaged canvas of shame, fury, and a dawning, terrible, undeniable respect. The sound of Mr. Abernathy's car crunching on the new gravel of the driveway faded into the afternoon heat. I closed the heavy oak door. The latch clicked shut with a sound of finality of a vault being sealed. The five of us were alone. We were standing in the great room, the symbolic heart of the home. The afternoon sun streamed through the newly restored floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room was magnificent, a testament to my vision and my wealth. It was also a courtroom, and I was the judge, the jury, and the prosecution. My family, they were the defendants. The facade of civility, held together by the thinnest threads of social grace, did not just fray, it shattered. Kalen exploded first. His face was a blotchy, furious red, his lawyerly composure completely gone. He took a step toward me, his finger jabbing in the air. "You did this out of spite," he spat the words ugly and raw. Every last bit of it. A calculated, vicious performance just to humiliate us. I turned to face him, my whole body calm, my energy focused. I let the silence hang for a moment before I spoke, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, quiet register. "Spite," I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Let's talk about spite, Kaylin." I took a slow step toward him. "Is it spite to build a 9-figure company from scratch after your own family called your ambition a silly hobby? Is it spite to pay cash for a property your family was about to lose to foreclosure? Because you, a partner-track lawyer, couldn't manage your own finances?" His face went pale. I pressed on my voice like ice. "I have the reports, Kaylin, from the Charleston law firm you admire so much. The detailed forensic accounting. I know about the credit card debt you've been rolling over for 3 years. I know about the underwater mortgage on that trendy Charleston condo you can't afford. I know you cashed out your 401k last year to cover a bad investment." "Should we discuss that?" I asked softly. "Or would you prefer we save that for your next performance review with the partners you were so eager to impress?" Kaylin looked like I had physically struck him. He paled, opened his mouth, then closed it, silenced. My gaze then shifted, dismissing him, and landed on my sister Lyra. She was weeping dramatically in a corner, her shoulders shaking in a performance of victimhood. "And you, Lyra?" I said, my voice flat, devoid of the energy I had just spent on Kaylin. "You were worried about your bachelorette party being ruined." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "While you were planning champagne toasts and arguing with caterers, this house, your inheritance, was literally rotting into the ground. The only thing you have ever contributed to this family, Lyra, is a wedding registry." Her weeping hitched into a shocked gasp. My eyes finally landed on my parents. Genevieve was wringing her hands, her face a mask of panicked denial. "We didn't know it was so bad, darling," she pleaded, her voice a weak flutter. "I swear to you, if we had known, we would have done something." "You didn't know, because you didn't want to know." My voice finally rose, not in a shout, but in a wave of pure, concentrated pain that had been building for a decade. "You were too busy maintaining the illusion of the perfect, prosperous Vance family, an illusion you funded by ignoring me." I saw confusion on their faces. I clarified it for them. "Don't you understand?" I asked, my voice cracking with the sheer, stunning simplicity of it. "I am the reason you could afford to fund Kaylin's law school. I am the reason you could pay for Lyra's tuition and her apartment and her endless string of unpaid internships. I am the reason Dad could afford to turn down commissions he felt were beneath him, because I asked for nothing. I took nothing. I paid my own way through everything. I was the family's ghost, the silent, unacknowledged, and most profitable asset." I walked over to Alistair. He was staring into the cold, clean fireplace as if the answers were written in the soot. I stood in front of him until he was forced to meet my gaze. "And you, Dad?" I said, my voice softening into something even more dangerous. "This was your dream, the landmark designation." I looked him right in the eye. "But dreams require work. They require sacrifice. They require getting your hands dirty and facing failure and trying again. You just talked. You sketched in your notebooks and you complained that the world didn't appreciate your genius." I took a breath. I didn't talk, I built. I turned and gestured around the magnificent room, at the restored beams, the polished floors, the sunlit space. "This isn't a house I bought," I announced to all of them. "This is a company I acquired. A failing asset with a toxic balance sheet that I turned around through strategic investment and ruthless logical execution. These are the skills you told me were worthless." I looked back at Kaylin's pale, shocked face. "So no brother?" I said, my voice ringing with a final, terrible clarity. "I didn't do this out of spite. I did it because it was a smart business decision." I let my gaze sweep over all of them one last time, "and because I am better at being a Vance than any of you ever were." The raw, brutal truth of my words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. There was nothing left but the 4 of them, and the magnificent echoing wreckage of their pride. They didn't stay at the house. Of course not. There was no offer made, no hollow gesture of reconciliation. After the reckoning, a thick, unbreathable silence filled the great room. They retreated, like a defeated army, in their separate cars. My assistant had booked them rooms for the night following my precise instructions, not at a charming local inn, but at a generic soulless chain motel off the highway, a beige box of fluorescent lighting and the faint smell of disinfectant, a place with no history, no legacy, no pretense. It was a deliberate choice, a final silent underscoring of what they had lost. The emotional devastation had left them scattered. I watched them go from my drone feed not as a unit, but as 4 separate wounded individuals slinking away from the scene of their own demolition. The next morning, I was sitting on the new lakeside terrace, a cup of coffee, warming my hands, the early sun glinting off the calm, glassy surface of Lake Keowee. Henderson's landscaping crew was working quietly at the far end of the lawn, laying down fresh sod, the final touch on the restoration. The air was peaceful, and then I saw him, a single solitary figure walking slowly up the long driveway. It was my father. He looked older, smaller, as if the confrontation had physically stripped him of his usual blustering pride, leaving behind something frail and uncertain. He didn't try to come onto the terrace. He didn't approach me. He just stopped on the new, perfect green lawn and stood there looking up at the house. His house. My house. His eyes scanned every detail, the perfect alignment of the porch columns, the new slate roof, the gleam of the windows. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice raspy, directed not at me, but at the house itself, the joinery on the porch columns. He said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't place. It's mortise and tenon, the authentic way. Most contractors today, they would have just used screws and glue. It was the highest compliment he could give, an admission of quality from the one man whose architectural opinion had once meant the world to me. I didn't move from my chair. I hired the best, I replied, my voice even. He nodded slowly, as if to himself. He began to walk along the perimeter of the house, his hand ghosting over the new stonework of the foundation, not quite touching it. He wasn't judging it anymore. He was admiring it. He was seeing the work, the thought, behind it all. I had plans for all of this, he said quietly, his voice thick with regret. In my head, on paper, I never found the right time, the right money. You never asked me for money, I stated. It was a simple fact, not an accusation. He stopped his slow patrol and finally turned to look at me, his eyes, for the first time, completely unguarded. They were filled with a profound, complex mixture of shame and pain. How could I? He whispered the question, a genuine plea for understanding. He took a hesitant step onto the lawn in my direction. How could I ask for help? From the daughter whose path I never understood, the one I was. He swallowed hard, the admission physically paining him, the one I was jealous of. The word landed in the quiet morning air like a felled tree. Jealous. It was a seismic event, a crack in the very foundation of our entire relationship. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me, the truth finally torturously spilling out. Your success? He said, his voice barely audible. It was so fast, so decisive, in a world of code and data I couldn't comprehend. It felt like a judgment on my own slow, dithering failures, on every project I abandoned, every commission I was too proud to take. He shook his head, a gesture of self-disgust. I hid my fear behind disdain. It was easier to dismiss your world than to admit I was failing in mine. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a reason. It was the most honest, the most vulnerable, the most real thing he had said to me in 20 years. The anger in my chest, that hard, hot knot of fury I had carried for so long, didn't vanish. I didn't forgive him, not in that moment, but for the first time, I understood him. Later that day, after he had gone, my phone pinged with a text message. It was from Lyra. The text was a long, rambling paragraph filled with typos and devoid of punctuation, almost as if she'd typed it with tears blurring her vision. Marie, I am so sorry. I know I'm an idiot. I was so awful yesterday, and I just never got it. I always thought you were just busy and boring with her computer stuff, but or like a superhero or something. I saw Dad's face. He never looks like that. I'm so sorry I was such a brat about my party. I was just being stupid and selfish, and I miss you. It was clumsy. It was still in its own way about her feelings, but it was genuine. It was an apology not just for her behavior, but for her blindness. Kalen remained silent. His pride was too deep, his humiliation too raw. The wound I'd inflicted on his ego was too precise. But 2 out of 3, it was a start. The chapter ends with me standing on the terrace, watching my father's car disappear down the long driveway. He was a stooped figure in a cloud of dust, leaving the magnificent house we both loved for very, very different reasons. The anger in me was still there, a pilot light that may never go out, but it was now tempered with a flicker of something else, something unexpected and unwelcome, a weary, complicated pity. Before I returned to Austin, there was one last piece of business. I called one final family meeting. I didn't summon them to the house that was sacred ground, now my ground. Instead, the meeting was held in the sterile neutral conference room of Crawford, Finch, and Monroe. It was a room designed for high-stakes negotiation, with a long polished table that reflected the grim Charleston sky, a room that smelled of power and billable hours. This was my territory. I sat at the head of the table, Mr. Crawford seated silently and professionally to my right. My family sat opposite me. They looked like a defeated delegation that had come to hear the terms of their surrender. My father's eyes were fixed on the table. My mother's were red-rimmed, and Lyra just looked small and lost. Kalen was a coiled spring of hostile silence, his jaw tight. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I began my voice as cool and polished as the table between us. I am not giving you keys to the house. The words landed with the soft thud of a coffin lid closing. I saw the last flicker of hope die in my mother's eyes. Access will be limited, and by invitation only, I continued. From across the table, Kalen let out a short, bitter scoff, a ghost of his former arrogance. My eyes snapped to his, my gaze so sharp and cold that he physically recoiled, silencing him instantly. I reached for a thick leather-bound document in front of me and slid it to the center of the table. It made a solid, authoritative sound. This, I announced, is the charter for the Kiowee Trust. The house is its primary asset. It will be managed by a neutral third-party trustee, Mr. Crawford here. Its purpose is to preserve the property for future generations of the Vance family. I then explained the terms, my voice even and dispassionate, as if I were outlining a corporate policy. The trust which I have endowed will pay for all upkeep taxes and insurance. To use the house for holidays or weekends, family members must submit a formal request in writing to the trustee 30 days in advance. A significant security deposit to be determined by the trustee will be required. Any and all damage will be billed directly to the party responsible. I let that sink in. I was turning their home into a high-end vacation rental, and they were the tenants. This isn't a gift, I said, my eyes meeting each of theirs, in turn lingering for a moment on my father. It is a responsibility you have now been given a second chance to learn. You will treat this piece of history and my investment with the respect you never showed it before. Then I turned my full attention to Kalen. I know about the investigation at your firm, I said quietly, the words dropping into the silent room like stones, the creative client billing, the ethics committee hearing. You're about to be disbarred, Kalen. His face turned a waxy ashen gray. He looked like he couldn't breathe. My company, Nexus AI, is expanding its legal department. I continued, my voice betraying no emotion. We need a junior compliance officer. The job involves basic document review, tedious entry-level work. It pays a fraction of what you used to make, but it's a job. I leaned forward slightly. It's a chance to not be a complete and utter failure. The offer is on the table for 1 week. You can report to my general counsel on Monday. I had offered him a lifeline, but it was wrapped in the coarse burlap of humiliation. It was a chance to rebuild himself, but only by submitting to my authority, my charity, my world completely. The choice was his. Finally, I pushed my chair back and stood up. The meeting was over. My parents and Lyra were speechless, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and a dawning understanding of the New World Order. I had not only taken control of their past, I had just dictated the terms of their future. The final scene of this long, painful drama did not take place in a house, but in the sky. I was on my jet ascending over the patchwork quilt of South Carolina, climbing into the clean, cold air. Through the window I could see Lake Keowee below, a sapphire set in green velvet, and on its shore, the house, a perfect white jewel. I leaned my head against the cool glass, the hum of the engines a soothing lullaby of power and distance. I didn't get the satisfying, tearful reconciliation of a movie. There were no group hugs, no easy forgiveness. I didn't get a perfect family. Instead, I got something better. I got control. I established a new foundation not just for the house, but for my family. A foundation built on new rules, on consequences, on respect, and on the undeniable, data-driven truth of my success. The anger, that fire that had burned for so long, hadn't vanished, but it had changed, transformed. The furious, vengeful flames had cooled, banked down into the quiet, clean, efficient hum of power. I was flying back to my life in Austin, leaving them behind to learn the new rules of a game I invented. I closed my eyes, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in days. I wasn't the family ghost anymore. I was the founder. It's funny, looking back on it all now. From here in this office where it all began, the anger that felt like a furnace back then has cooled. It's not gone. I think a part of it will always be the pilot light inside of me, the thing that keeps me sharp. But it's no longer a wildfire, it's just power. A quiet, clean hum. The house on Lake Keowee still stands more beautiful than ever preserved under the Foundation's care. Our family? Well, our family exists in its new form. It's awkward, it's structured, it's not the stuff of holiday movies, but it is for the first time in my life. Honest. People who hear my story often focus on the revenge. And yes, I won't lie. There was a certain cold satisfaction in that, but if you're listening to this and you feel that same ache of being undervalued, of being the ghost at your own family's table, I want you to hear what I learned beyond the satisfaction of the win. First, your value is not a consensus decision. It is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. For years I waited for their approval, for them to finally say, "We see you. You're worthy." It never came. The turning point in my life wasn't when I made my first $1,000,000. It was when I truly, deeply understood that their validation was irrelevant. I had to become my own gold standard. Stop waiting for them to see your worth and start building a life, a career, a self so undeniable that their opinion becomes nothing more than a whisper in a hurricane. Second, the greatest power isn't money, it's information. The moment the dynamic truly shifted wasn't when I had more money than them. It was when I knew more about their situation than they did. It was when I had the data, when I knew about the lien, the late taxes, the pre-foreclosure. Anger is an emotion, but data is a weapon. In your own life, whatever your battle is, do your homework. Knowledge is the ultimate leverage. It transforms you from a reactor into a strategist. And finally, on the subject of revenge. It's a powerful motivator, but a terrible destination. Tearing them down felt good for a day, but building that house back up, creating the Keowee Trust, turning a symbol of my pain into a monument of my competence, that is a satisfaction that lasts. The most profound victory isn't in destroying their world. It's in creating your own and making it so beautiful and strong that their old world ceases to matter. So I'll leave you with this thought. The silence of those who dismiss you is a blank canvas. It is your life's work to paint a masterpiece on it so loud and clear that they can never again claim they didn't see it. Now, this story was about drawing boundaries and redefining a family, but every choice had a consequence. I'm genuinely curious to know what you think. Was this justice, or was it just an elegant, well-funded revenge? I offered my brother Kalen a job. Was that an act of mercy, or the final, most humiliating twist of the knife? Can a family truly heal after a fracture like this, or is a new, more business-like relationship the only realistic path forward? If this story made you think, and if you have an opinion on how it should have ended, please share it in the comments below. Your perspectives are what make these stories come alive. And if you believe that the best stories are the ones that challenge us and make us grow, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss the journey we're going on next.